lot has been said about the Ferrari Testarossa over the last 30, holy cow, holy moly. This car is over 35 years old. That just dawned on me, which is crazy to think about. That is just mind-boggling. So what can I add that hasn't already been said about the Testarossa? Probably not much, but what I can tell you about is my own personal experience, why I bought this Testarossa, and why I absolutely love these cars. So here's one reason right here. Here we go. That never gets old. Dang. Flat 12, 4.9 liter, 5 liter, 4.9 liter, flat 12 of just pure bliss. Now, one thing that I have done on this car is when I first bought this car, it had stock, it was completely stock exhaust, which it sounded like a boring sewing machine. It was just, you know, you could hear just a little bit of like that, you know, that flat 12 with that kind of Ferrari magic, but it was only between, you know, 5,000 and now 6,000, 6,200 RPM. You can kind of hear it sing, but now all the way from 3,000 all the way up to 7,000 RPM. Oh my gosh, it is absolutely glorious with the Capristo exhaust. And I took this car on the Crescent Classic Tour and was following behind a 1990 or 91 Ferrari Testarossa, and it had a Capristo exhaust system on it. Oh my goodness, I couldn't get close enough to the back of that car just to hear the music coming off. I was driving this car, but I was enjoying the sound of the Testarossa in front of me. And these exhaust systems are not cheap, and it was a really hard pill to swallow. And I was like, oh my, I've got to order that exhaust. And so I did, and put this exhaust on. It was some of the best money I ever put into this car. Besides paying for doing the full major on this car, which is not cheap either, is this exhaust. It just makes it so much more enjoyable to drive. Why did I buy this car? Now, as you guys probably know, there's quite a few different variants of, when I say TR or Testarossa, I'm talking about the original Testarossa, like this one started in late 84, but really 1985 is when this one came on the scene. But then of course you have the, you know, subtle changes throughout the years. So I better get on it here. Catch up with traffic here. When you get in and drive this car, you do not mistake it for anything else. Now, this car was compared against the Lamborghini Countach, like my 1985-86 downdraft Countach. Now the Countach, when you're driving the Countach, especially on a long trip, you are always reminded that you are in an exotic car, that you are in something that's just weird. You know, and I don't say weird, but just different. You know, people look at you and, you know, and you're, you know, in that car, you're like, yeah, I mean, because you're driving a Countach. This car, on the other hand, is comfortable enough where you can take it on a long drive, and you kind of, you know, I don't listen to the radio on cars, and so I just kind of get into my thoughts, but I can drive this a long ways, and it, you know, after a while, I don't want to say you don't feel like you're in something special, but it kind of starts feeling like a normal car. Everything is in your hands, the gauges are nice and easy to read, the shifter's in the right spot, you know, everything works, great air conditioning, which reminds me, the air conditioning thing rocks. It is ice cold. It always has been. I know we took it back up to Vince to get it recharged, but even before that, oh, it would just freeze you out, which is crazy. It's almost as good as my Ford F-150 pickup truck. But getting back to it, you know, I drive this car and you can kind of forget you're on the turnpike, you're going on a long trip, you know, you can kind of use this car as like a regular car. And people still do tend to look at you, and you kind of, your first instinct is like, why are they looking at me, or why do they have their, you know, their camera out, or their phone? And you're like, oh yeah, I'm driving a Ferrari Testarossa. I kind of completely forgot. Where the Countach, now you're always reminded. You are always reminded that you're in something. Just, it takes effort. It takes a lot more effort to drive a Countach than this car. For those of you that are a little bit older like me, when the Testarossa came out, it was like no other car for many different reasons. Just the sheer size, the girth of this car. I mean, the width. I mean, this is a very wide car, but this car just blew people's minds, and it was so different, and it was just like nothing else. The side mirror. I mean, that was so cool. And the reason why they did it is because they had to be able to, I think for various regulations, don't quote me, but I remember that, they first had it initially designed with 2 or at least 1 single low mirror. They had to move it up here because that mirror, as far as how far it had to stick out in order to be able to have a visual around the side fenders, it just wasn't going to cut it. It literally would have to be way out here. So they moved it up to this side. And eventually the laws got changed and they were able to move them down in '87. Then you have the side strakes, completely iconic to this car. This car introduced this styling cue, which got carried over to other cars down the road or following years. Not necessarily even Ferraris, but even kind of made a splash through other different brands. The reason why they didn't initially want to do these side strakes, I've actually seen some Testarossa where people actually remove these, and it actually is pretty cool, but it just blows your mind because it throws it off, because these are so associated with the Ferrari Testarossa. But at first they weren't going to do this, but they had to put something here because the laws stipulated, I think it had to either do with, child's heads or things like that. You couldn't have an opening where somebody or a small child could get an arm or a hand or a head into the side, so they had to do this, which is crazy to think about. And of course, and that even carried all the way over into the 348 later on. Now let's talk about maintenance. Ooh, Nelly. Maintenance is not cheap. The funny thing is, when these cars were, you can pick these things up for, man, I even saw them down to $40,000, $50,000 for quite some time, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. And an engine out was still gonna run you in the teens, at least $10,000 for an engine out, full service, clutch, all that stuff. And at that time it's like, oh my gosh, 10% or 15% of the price of a car for an engine out. Now that the prices are where they're at now, it's funny how the relationship, it's still probably 15 grand. You can dump 20 grand into a car that needs, has quite a bit of needs as far as once you pull the engine out. But now it seems a little bit more acceptable now that the price of these things have gone, and it's really, you really can't even find these things for under 100,000, especially the early ones. And of course, the later ones are way over that now. But man, these are not cheap cars to maintain. Luckily, I always look at cars as like, heaven forbid, if I need to sell this car, can I get my money back out of it after maintenance, things like that. I was very lucky that I bought this car at the right time, and so I can do that. I can recoup my initial costs and all my maintenance costs on this car, which you can't, it's hard to do that on newer cars. You can on some, actually, GT3 Porsches, things like that, but it's getting easier now that with inflation and just the overall prices of cars. But yeah, maintenance on these is not cheap, and you really need to find people that know these cars. Because even you can walk into a brand new Ferrari dealership and say, hey, I need work on my Testarossa, and I'm not saying you're going to roll the dice, because they have very good people, but your best bet is to find somebody that at an independent shop that really knows and has worked on a lot of these cars, because there are quite a few little things once you get in there that kind of tricks of the trade. People that have been around these cars for some time, they know what to do. Now this car, I did upgrade the diff. That was one of these things on the earlier cars that they did have an issue with. You heard about some that would go and turn into a parking lot, turn really sharp, and all of a sudden you'd hear a pop, and the diff case would actually crack the casting. Whereas I upgraded to an all aluminum machine billet case on this. I also did the fuse box. I upgraded the fuse box to the old gold-plated fuse box on this car, so I shouldn't have any issues with the fuse box moving forward. Now I've driven a later Testarossa in '88 and '89, because I've actually had 2 of these cars, and they made a change to the front where I didn't fit very well, and I was really disappointed when I first drove. I want to say it was a 1989 car, because when I got in, my knees, my shins hit up around the dash, because there's a little tray that kind of goes up along the front of these cars or up underneath the steering wheel, and I did not fit very well. And I had the seat all the way back, and my feet, my legs just hit. It was, to say I was disappointed, I was like, oh my gosh, because I'll cram myself into any car and try to make it work and drive it and enjoy it. But I was really disappointed. But then when I got in an '86 and it did not have that tray, I fit like a glove. And at that point, I was like, okay, I can do this. I've got to find one, because I just love these cars. The gauges on the Testarossa are absolutely fantastic. With the orange face, It's just so 1980s, which was carried out through the Testarossa, then later through the 328, and on into the 348. When this car came out in 1984, 85, there was just absolutely nothing like it. It was just so wide and just so different. Yes, you had the Lamborghini Countach, which was crazy wide, but I would bet, and we need to maybe measure this, I would bet this car is every bit as wide as the Lamborghini Countach, because I know when I put this in a car trailer, I have like a 1/4 inch in my car trailer on either side, which is about the same, maybe even a little bit less than I have for one of the Countaches. Yes, the steering is really heavy, especially when you're going low speeds, but who cares? You're in a Ferrari Testarossa. The clutch is pretty dang heavy. It's, you know, compared to cars now where it's almost just like a, well, manual cars anyway, if they're still making them, you know, it's almost like a button. They're so lightweight. Well, this was pretty heavy clutch, heavy steering, but that's what I like about this car. It's what makes this car the Ferrari Testarossa. Now later on, they did subtle updates. They did things to the chassis. Obviously, the outside of the car changed, and it became the, you know, the 512, and then of course it became the 512M, which you know, those are great cars. I think they only brought 75 of those in the U.S., the 512Ms, but I'm just not a fan of. They started really changing around what I think the Testarossa started out as in 1984, 85. But all right, here we go. Love it. This car just feels special. It just, old Ferraris, you know, 60s cars had their own feel. The 70s cars and the 80s cars kind of joined a little bit, and then even the 90s had that feel with just the steering wheel. You know, I know you can adjust these and you have to get underneath the bottom and kind of you know, adjust them a little bit, but it's just the way the steering wheel sits a little bit flat. You're kind of driving like this, and a lot of people don't like that. They complain about that, but not me. I love it. I absolutely love it. All right, here we go. I could do this all day, all day. Now the Testarossa is not a super rare car, especially when it comes down to supercars of this era. They built about 7,000, maybe a little bit over 7,000, but a majority of those were the low mirror cars, and of course production ramped up, you know, 87, 88, 89, and 90, all the way into 1991 is when they continued to produce this body style. Later they made updates to them to the 512 TR, then of course the 512M, but not many of them still exist today with the single mirror on the side, and especially not 85 and 86 cars, and even the 85s with the metric wheels and the single mirror. Man, you just don't, you don't see them around or see them on the roads anymore, hardly anymore, and you don't see them come up for sale very often. Because collectors now are starting to demand or prefer not only the later model cars like the 512Ms, everybody has seen the prices on those things shoot up to 500,000, even 700,000, 800,000 on those, depending on the mileage, because they only built 75 of those. But the single mirror cars, for at least guys my age, men and women my age, for me, this was the one to have. It's so good to have this car back out on the road. I have missed it so much, especially with fall coming. Oh, this car is going to be fantastic for long drives through the great country roads here in Kansas. But I do want to give a big shout out to Vince, Chaz, and Kirsten for getting this car in great hands. It was in great hands. You guys did a fantastic job on this car. AC works. Everything is up to snuff now. Thank you so much. And once again, you guys, if you like this type of content, please give me a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe, and we'll see you guys again very soon. This thing is just a joy. Here we go. A little bit of wheel spinning first. 7,000. Third gear. 7,000. Fourth gear. We better shut it down. Woo, Nelly. Ah. got up to the speed limit right there.